Hi there, it's me, Matt Lane, co-host of Because of the Universe, and it seems like you have missed a show, but don't worry, here it is. We hope you enjoy it.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock on Saturday and you are listening to Because the Universe, your fortnightly satirical science panel discussion extravaganza with him, Harry Manners, the smeller of flowers, climate of trees and advocate of all things fruit and vegetable.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And here's Matthew Lane, debonair gentleman, jolly old chap, jam to the nation's fresh-baked donut.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. As always, Harry, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Your introduction of me. I entirely agree. I think I always feel not quite good enough, actually. when it comes around to the introductions, yours are always so much better than mine.
Well, I spend an inordinate amount of time on them.
Yes, I think that you do in the week. Right. So we're going to be discussing another topic. Now, you may remember, if you tuned in a fortnight ago to the last show, we were asking the question... whether or not eugenics was the natural solution to overpopulation. And we had two wonderful guests who are with us again this week. We'll bring them in a minute after the news, but they're back with us from last week because we're doing the second part of that question. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about eugenics.
We did.
We asked whether it was a science. We basically said no. We said it was more of a moral system. And then we looked at an example of modern eugenics today and discussed the ethics of that and how exactly that's happening.
Yes.
So today we're going to move on to that second part. We're going to talk about, and I say this in inverted commas, the problem of overpopulation, whether it is actually a problem and whether there are solutions. But Harry, shall we do some news?
Do some news, yeah, let's do that. So I've got some good stories today. I think there's been a lot going on this week. It's been quite a good choice of little stories going on. So my first one is about DNA storage. So scientists in Switzerland have found that it's possible to encode information in DNA on a time span in the millions of years. So by cooling down strands of DNA to about minus 40 degrees Celsius and encasing them in hermetically sealed glass, you can essentially provide a stability on the order of 2 million years. So we've seen this before a lot in fossils, creatures such as woolly mammoths, frozen in Arctic tundra. We have viral DNA, which is over 40,000 years old. But you can essentially increase this up to the millions of years simply by encasing it in some kind of sanitized environment. So encasing it in glass. So this entails some kind of astounding capability for long-term data storage in the future. So this could possibly provide a safeguard, essentially allow us to back up the sum total knowledge of the human race against some kind of potential catastrophe. So just 1 gram of DNA can hold over 450 exabytes of data. So for anyone who exabytes, or anyone doesn't know, an exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes or 1 million terabytes. So you think of one of those souped up hard drives that you've probably all got at home. This is 1 million of those in 1 gram of DNA.
Wow. I do find this intriguing. I have absolutely no idea how they intend to code data onto a DNA type
because you didn't mention this before when I mentioned this earlier in the week. So I've looked at this again and I found that the methods on this are still extraordinarily early in development in terms of actually encoding things. Yeah. But it's just they've now got solid numbers on the capability of data storage. So with the current amount of information gathered in all of human history, we would need just 4 grams of DNA.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Yeah, that's really amazing, isn't it? It is. Yes.
Well, let's we did a show on the things that could kill the human race.
We did. I thought it was a lovely little tie-in for our recent topic.
So at least we know.
We know that if something destroys us all, at least we could possibly leave a record behind.
Someone might remember us. Yeah. Or find out about us. I've got one. Exposure to psychedelic drugs prevents asthma. In mice. In mice. I do have to add that as a qualification. But still,
there's a big problem with asthma in mice.
yes, all those mice that when they run around just coughing. So, what's been going? They've trialled a hallucinatory drug, sometimes sold as a substitute for LSD, and it's been shown that it helps reduce asthma in mice. So this is happening in the States, and they demonstrated that a very small dose of the drug, about 50 to 100 times less than what's needed to alter behaviour, can prevent the development of symptoms linked to asthma. So that's interesting.
It is.
It raises the possibility of human trials.
It does, but I think it's even better that it's on mice, because I would love to have that job of sitting in a lab watching mice trip.
Get high. But also stop coughing, let's not forget.
Yes, wheezing, tripping mice, enormous pupils.
The dose was not high enough for any of the mice to experience any psychedelic effects at all.
Well, what's the point of doing the experiment?
I think the point was to try and get rid of the asthma. Typical of you to be. Anyway.
How dare you?
So I mean, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure whether it. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I'm not entirely sure whether it will ever get to human trials.
Well, I mean, why not? I mean,
I agree with you. Why not?
Yeah.
But there's a certain
in a sense, yes, I agree with you.
Of
just
taboo.
Kind of, there is, yes, yeah. Well,
maybe
we'll
we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see what happens.
I don't want to say anything because it's a bit early to jump the gun. Yeah.
But there you go, psychedelic. If you've got asthma,
psychedelics. Lovely.
Another
Thanks,
news
Matt.
story. Aaron.
Okay, so the second one I'm really interested in. So Mars One, the private venture intent on sending a one-way manned mission to Mars to establish colonies by 2024, has announced their final 100 candidates.
You must be so jealous.
Oh, so I am, yes, absolutely. So their initial volunteer call produced over 200,000 applications, and they've been narrowing it down since then, as sometime last year. So the mission will be one way, meaning there's no possibility of a return trip for those who make the journey. The trip is planned to be funded by a mixture of crowdsourced funds and broadcasting royalties by screening the mission to the public on television. So among these final 100...
No, that's a horrible idea.
I know. It is awful, isn't it? Because essentially you will be watching these people
die.
Yes, essentially.
That sounds like a film. I didn't know they were planning on televising.
Yes, absolutely. It's quite an interesting idea, but it is worth noting that, of course, these people will have. They're not just going to die en route. These people are going to get their established base. They will have an inordinate amount of resources to keep them going for a year or so before
People are going to be able to vote on who gets more food.
I know it sounds very Big Brother, doesn't it? Yeah. So among these final 100 are actually 5 Brits. In their early 20s and 30s. So we have 2 astronomy PhDs, a physics master student, a Virgin Media project manager, and a lab technician.
Oh.
Yeah. The candidates are now scheduled to begin a rigorous regime of stress testing and training in all aspects of the myriad skills that they'll need to survive on the Red Planet, which is set to whittle down the candidates to the final list. Because, of course, these people, there's going to be no... mechanics, there's going to be no doctors. Everyone is going to have to be versed in everything. Yeah. So it's the ultimate survival scenario. And I'm absolutely fascinated by this. I've been listening to all the news reports. Lots of these, most of these 5 Brits have been on Radio 4 all week, But it's amazing to hear people who are genuinely, they're our age. They're university students.
Well, maybe not your age because you're so old.
I am very old. Well, the 2 PhD students are my age.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. But, just to hear these fresh-faced, they sound very young, and yet they are among the forefront of pioneering human endeavour. It's amazing. I'm very, very intrigued by this.
I'm jealous.
Absolutely. Have you got another one?
I've got another one. Limpet teeth set new strength record.
What? Limpet teeth.
Yep. They have a tongue bristling with tiny teeth to scrape food off rocks. And they often swallow particle of rocks, which means when you examine their feces, it looks like little balls of concrete because it's hardened in their guts. Their teeth are made of a mineral protein composite, and researchers have taken tiny fragments of this composite, carved it into a bone, as in, the caricature kind of cartoonish bone shape.
Yes.
Carved it into that sort of shape, which they can use to do some tensile stress testing, and it's the strongest biological molecule known to man, stronger than Kevlar.
That's incredible. It really is incredible. But why?
Don't know.
Why do they need Kevlar strength teeth?
Because they scratch their food off the rock, I suppose.
I suppose. I didn't know that rock was that hard. It sounds odd to say that out loud, but really to have the hardest substance known in the animal kingdom.
Tiny little teeth, limpets.
Sometimes it makes you wonder about the details of natural selection. That kind of every niche is filled, really. Every single niche, to the point where some poor organism is literally trying to eat the rock off.
Yes. Eat the rock off the rock.
Yeah, eat the rock off the rock. Is it? Yeah, it's just that's surely pushing the boat out a little too far.
Yeah. It's an iron-based mineral called geothite. The reason it's interesting, though, is because companies can now start looking at using similar compounds to help build aircrafts, cars, and boats. So the next time you get on a plane, it may be made of limpet.
Thank you, limpet teeth.
Have you got another one, or am I going out on one more?
I think you should go for another one.
Okay. Toxin from world's most venomous spider What do you think the next bit
It's
is?
going to be some kind of miraculous anti-venom, I'm sure. Something very
Toxin
lovely.
from the world's most venomous spider could treat impotence. According to new research, get this. According to I didn't know that such a place existed. According to new research at the Catholic University of Korea.
Where is this place? I have to see it.
I assume it's in Korea.
It'd be amazing if it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't even in Korea. Yeah.
It's this promising molecule which comes from this venom of this aggressive spider said to be the most toxic spider. It's not that it's been trialed on humans. Rather, they were just, somebody was doing a study of all the people that had ever been bitten and survived by the spider. And I apologise if any of you are sensitive. And many of them reported long-term erections after being bitten.
I see.
Now, this in and of itself amuses me.
This is, yes.
So they managed to identify the compound in the venom.
As
and
one does.
They're now moving towards human trials.
Well, this is wonderful. This is, of course, wonderful. It's it's a problem that needs addressing, and there are a great many people who suffer from it.
It's 1 in 4 40 to 70-year-olds.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's a conservative
I
estimate.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
But of course, it's also a problem with some young people. I mean, it's a genuine problem. And
so far, it's been used.
Oh dear.
Trying not to laugh. It's been used on rats. So you could have asthmatic rats tripping
with
that are rather
ready to go.
high up there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Great.
Well, I look forward to these
Move
mice.
on to the human trials.
I may have to go into biology.
That's a bit strange, but okay.
Yeah.
Right then, shall we bring in the guests?
Yes, let's. Yes.
Let's do that.
Okie dokie. So,
Guests. Oh, sorry, a bit loud. If we could please have you were on the show last week, so 2 weeks ago, so people should be able to remember you. We've got Sam and we've got Akshay. But in case anyone's tuned in just now and wasn't here before, why don't you tell everyone who you are, your subject, and you know the drill, truth and a lie.
Okay, so I'm Sam. I am doing a master's in international political economy, and I was also on the show 2 weeks ago. And I did a truth and a lie 2 weeks ago, so
Unfortunately, we're going to press you for another.
I'm kind of running out now.
You think you're running out? Akshay's been on the show for this is his third time now. So
I have climbed Kilimanjaro, and I've climbed to Everest Base Camp.
Oh wow, that's both are interesting.
I think that you have climbed to Everest Base Camp.
I'm going to say that as well.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's amazing.
That is impressive.
You both got it wrong 2 weeks ago, so I think there's.
That makes up for it.
But
so, can you please elaborate? When was this?
It was in 2012, just after the Olympics, and
that's excellent.
You have to fly to the most dangerous airport in the world.
I've heard of this. Is this
what airport is this?
Yes.
Lukla, yeah. I
explain.
I've heard of this.
It's a very short uphill runway deep in the middle of the Himalayas.
As far as I'm aware, the end of the runway is a sheer cliff of some. It's a very sharp. You're on the side of a mountain.
Yeah, I think it's about 1,000-meter drop.
Yes. So if you aren't going,
horrible. If
something goes wrong during takeoff, I imagine bad things happen.
Bad things.
Yes. Wow. I'm impressed.
Well done.
Yes. Well done.
Akshay.
I don't know how to sort of match that at all, but that's amazing.
Oh.
Well, I'm Akshay. I'm a biomedical scientist. I'm second year. Truth and a lie. I'm 20 years old, or I'm 21 years old.
That's such a good.
There's no way.
Really riveting.
You can't know that unless you stalk my Facebook.
Well, I would say you are 20
Facebook.
years old.
Okay. If you say 20, I'm going to say 21.
Okay.
I'm 21. I took a gap year.
Last.
Which means the net score is Matt 1.
Matt 1, Harry -1.
Yeah. Let's go for that.
Yeah.
Could I ask a quick question about the limpet teeth?
Yeah, go on.
You said that it's the strongest material known.
Biological material.
But it's biological material. But is crystal biological material? Because
that's an interesting
a proper
question.
crystal is the strongest material.
Yeah. That's a very interesting question.
Right, I've got the article.
Well, I do know that isn't diamond not the hardest?
Sorry, not crystal. Anyway. Yeah, I meant diamond. Sorry.
Right.
Well, I wouldn't call diamond biological. Why are we?
Are you referring to that? It's an organic molecule. Carbon being an organic molecule.
I mean, yeah, it being organic in the sense that it's not man-made.
Well, perhaps we're talking about that diamond is not an allotrope of carbon that participates in organics.
Well, the way I'm interpreting it is it's saying if you look at an organism, what is the strongest chemical you can find?
Oh, you mean it just literally inside them?
In a living thing?
Yeah,
Okay,
much.
fine. Okay, well, then I understand.
Rather than just organic molecules.
In general.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think this is slightly more specific. Right, thank you very much, both of you, for coming on.
Yes, thank you for coming on again.
So we're going to be talking about overpopulation, which means, Harry,
hello.
You being so old,
yes,
have seen the world's population get very large very quickly.
I have from nothing.
Do you have any comments on that?
Well, yes. I mean, this is a problem that has been going for about 200 years now, as far as I'm aware, in that the world's population was essentially stabilized around 1 billion for hundreds of years during the Middle Ages. And then there was this sudden incredible upsweep, in the 1800s, is precipitated by the Industrial Revolution and further later on in the early 20th century by invention of antibiotics and, progress of medicine and so forth. So it's really kind of if you look at the population growth charts, you see this straight line for a very, very long time where essentially society has grown up around this trend of slowly growing but essentially stable population across the world. And then suddenly in the last 200 years we have this unprecedented explosion of population. It's so vast that we can't even get our heads around it now. I believe we have easily capped 7 billion people on the world now. That is an astonishing number of people. I've seen these infographics of countries scaled relative to their populations. I think this is on the internet recently. It was amazing just to see some of these places, China, India, I think even unexpected places like the Philippines have these incredible populations you wouldn't believe could fit on that area, that land surface. And I think it's something that we as a species have yet to learn to deal with in a pragmatic sense, because what do you do? How could you stem the growth? You can't. We can't tell people not to breed.
Yeah. Or could we?
Indeed, that is a subject of what we want to discuss. But for all intents and purposes, the answer historically has been no, because there hasn't been a need for it.
Yeah. So before we go over to Akshay and Sam, I want to say something.
Yes.
Which is, I have absolutely no idea whether or not this planet is overpopulated. Because it seems to depend on the opinion of what you read. I can't tell whether we're just being really bad at stewarding resources.
Right.
And that's the problem.
There is an argument for that, isn't there?
Or is it just there are too many people for the resources we have, even if we stewarded them
well? I think something that I want to weigh in on, just bring this in early so we're aware, bring out the elephant in the room. We'll talk about the Fitz-Haber process, maybe. Are the other guests aware of this? This is something everyone. So the Fitz-Haber process, for readers and everyone who might not know, is essentially a process of nitrogen fixation, which was invented in the early 20th century, which allowed essentially you to replace the nitrogenous compounds in soil, and thereby we managed to double the world's potential output of food. So we already know that if that had not been carried out, we could not even sustain half of the world's current population.
Right.
So that's something that maybe is worth saying, but I absolutely appreciate your argument that that there is such an enormous amount of waste and imbalance in the distribution of resources in the world. There is an argument for is it you could potentially we can sustain 7 billion people in the world. People are alive now.
So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of throwing around statistics today. But I'm gonna throw one in now, and then we're gonna go over to Sam and Akshay to see what it is that they think. And so this is I do think the planet is overpopulated,
right.
But having looked into it, I'm much less secure in that view. I'm much less certain about it. So one of the statistics that struck me was the United Kingdom alone has a population density of about 661.9 of a person per square mile.
Of course.
If you took the entire population of the planet and put them on North America, the population density would be approximately 743 per square mile, which is less than the population density of Hong Kong.
Well.
Now, I mean, Hong Kong is a pretty densely populated place, but But even so, that still strikes me as a slightly surprising. Or there is a lot of space out there, and I know space isn't the only resource that is important.
No, but there's a huge amounts of the Earth's surface is completely barren and unpopulated. There's nothing there. I mean, even in the United States, so most of the middle, there's no one there.
No. So when we're talking about overpopulation, we're not talking about the problem of you can't fit people in the space you have available. I
think actually, it's absolutely relative to our level of technology and our social structure, because I just mentioned the Fitz-Arbor process. That is just relative to our technology. The planet has the ability, has an enormous amount of resources available to it. It's just whether we can harness them in the correct manner.
Yeah. So, Sam and Akshay, who wants to go first?
I can.
Go on, Akshay. What do you think?
What would you like to make it more specific, or should I just
No.
start
Be
talking?
general. Be general. As in, I feel this is quite. I'm not entirely sure
it?
where we're going to go. It's interesting.
Well, what I was going to say is that, at the rate we're currently going, it will get overpopulated in the sense that we won't have enough resources to meet the world's demands. I mean, that it's already going that way. If we lived as an average American did, then we would need 6 planets. The average American goes through 6 planets. Well, not the average American. But
One American goes through 6 planets.
No, the average American population would go through about 6 planets within about a few hundred years.
Really?
That's amazing.
So it's...
who's been to America here out of us? Everyone's been. Everyone has witnessed this gross consumerism.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but we're not here in England. We're not that far away anyway. Oh,
really?
We're going that way anyway. In terms of waste and in terms of using stuff that we don't, in terms of wasting things that we don't have to waste when we can. But our recycling, to be fair, say what you want, the recycling system here is quite good since it was implemented about a couple of years ago. Everywhere across the whole nation. I remember when we got our old black bin bags used to be taken from the tree stump down the road, and now we've got these big wheelie bins, and you must it's like I'm filing stuff rather than throwing it away.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I know what you mean.
But that in its which is good, because it's a bit of a hassle putting plastics and cardboard and general waste separately, but in the long term it's obviously going to do a lot of good.
Absolutely.
But what I was going to say is, when you said that thing about there's plenty of space on the planet, you can fit like many billions more on the planet. Like you said, the majority of America's desolate, and so is the majority of Australia as well. That the population size for the amount of space there is in Australia is ridiculous. There's so few people for how much space there is, just because it's so barren and just because it's the outback.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think we can very safely conclude that overpopulation is not a space problem.
No.
No.
No. Good. So we can safely assume that.
Yeah.
So what is this problem that people are talking about? So there's loads of really excellent clocks you can get online. I'm going to post some of them onto the Facebook page. Currently there's 7,296,466,000 plus minus sort of 50 people on the planet.
That is many.
It's quite a few.
Yep.
There's more people than I know.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
You don't know everyone?
I don't know everyone on the planet.
You don't know more than everyone on the planet.
No, I don't know more than everyone.
Births today, 182,000. Deaths today, 75,000.
That's amazing.
Population growth today, 107,000.
So you can just work out by how many deaths and how many births there are, which way it's going. And that's because of increased medical care, things like an aging populations living for longer. Many years ago, people in the, 1800s, they would have had their average life expectancy of 40 or 50, and now we can live to double that, 80, 90, easily. And scientists were saying I can't remember the full paper, but scientists were saying in the year 2012, the first child to live to be 1,000 was born. So I don't know how they predict.
Wait.
Yeah, go on.
Wait.
Yes.
The first child, in 2012, the first child to live to be 1,000 was born.
That's going to live to be 1,000 years old. So that's what they're predicting. That's what they predicted.
No way.
Yes way.
Really?
How?
Do you mean just because of medical implants and so forth, you can replace
medical technology?
That the human body will not be exhausted, essentially. You'll be able to replenish certain things as they fail up to the
robotics and such. Yeah. So you get to a point.
So that was a genuine prediction that in 2012 they expect that there will be people who are born who are going to live.
It's not that aberrant. I mean, the only things that could really but get in your way of trauma to the brain and things.
I don't know. That strikes me as very far away.
Something that I've been under the impression for some time is that a major barrier is things like diabetes. Eventually, the human body, or everyone will become type 2 diabetic by the age of 100 and something.
Pretty much.
So maybe that's something we would have to fiddle around with. But essentially, there are certain, there are only a certain number of barriers which are immutable.
Yeah. I mean, we get to a point where everybody will sort of have type 2 diabetes. You can't really avoid your insulin receptors in the kidney.
Yes, they slowly become
desensitized.
Yes.
Which means that they can't any longer respond to insulin. So you have type 2 diabetes.
Amazing.
Any listeners interested in whether or not we how old are we going to live to as individuals? Yes. I can point you back to our very first broadcast, and Akshay was actually a guest on that broadcast. We talked about, do we have to die? So if you were interested in that, go back and listen to that one.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. Go to
actually, though, I'm really surprised at this statistic.
I was amazed by that.
At this prediction. It just seems...
How can they know? How can they possibly know that?
The errors on it must be huge.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It must. I expect it's also an upward estimate.
I imagine so, but
I think it's more sort of any time after 2012 there will be a child born that is 1,000, rather than in 2012 there will be a child that will live until 3012.
I have another statistic to throw in, that the year 1996 was the barrier of life expectancy on the average in the first world being over 100.
1996.
Yeah.
I know Japan is the highest, has the highest life expectancy, and that's about 102.
That's amazing.
Which is incredible.
It's a long time.
The biggest contributing factors then to increased age, living longer then, is healthcare.
Absolutely.
What else?
Well, one thing we haven't discussed so far is food.
We've
now got GM crops. We've got better pesticides, fertilizers. And that's led to a food revolution. And now a lot more food is being produced than has ever been produced before.
Well, it's like Harry was saying.
The Fitz-Haber process.
That meant we were producing so much more. So there's an abundance of, for the most part, there's an abundance of food.
That's only going to get better as technology improves.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the GM methods are spread throughout the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sam, what do you think is going to happen with regard to the distribution of food? Because we are facing an unprecedented tension in the world in a political sense. So do you feel that the first world will foster the third world in provision of GM strains and so forth? How do you feel that will play out?
I think partly it depends on the technology.
Right.
If we can improve GM to make it more sustainable and to reduce the environmental impact that it has.
What environmental impact are you referring to?
Take things like pesticides.
Yeah.
There's problems that diseases might become immune, and effects on the soil, on the local environment.
So there needs to be more testing. So we're kind of just saying
there does
potentially to get so that we know with as much certainty as you ever can know anything, so that we know that this is I am uncomfortable with calling it a technology. That doesn't feel like the right word, but for want of a better word, this technology, this genetic...
It's an approach, isn't it?
It is an approach, yeah.
Because
so we just want to
I still am very much surprised by the opposition to it. It's almost a philosophical standpoint.
It is.
Opposed to anything remotely logical or pragmatic. It is simply even I don't want to get anything remotely political here, but there are certain manifestos. Just looking at the current general election, certain parties have just unilateral opposition to GM for no reason, apropos of nothing. It simply appeals to a certain demographic of their voters. It just
actually, can you enlighten us a little bit about some of those risks?
Yeah, well, there aren't really any risks.
Because I didn't think that there were.
There aren't any risks really at all. It's like saying one scientist out of 1,000 might have found one potential risk factor, and then the media's just gone, ooh, let's run with this and go, oh, GM, don't eat it because you might get cancer or something. Yeah. But it's not. There's no risk. Absolutely no risk.
What about the concern that Sam highlighted there of so if you engineer a crop to be herbicide or pesticide resistant,
yes.
What about the whatever sequence of genes that you've used to do that? What about that escaping into weeds? I mean, that's something that our GCSE students get taught, that's a concern.
How would I don't understand, because how would you how would that sequence of genes get transferred to the different species?
Right. So this is exactly what
Yes.
what I'm interested about, because it's confused me, because it was taught right from GCSE in biology.
Every time I got taught at GCSE, this is what happens, and then at A level they go, actually that's not what happens, and then at university it goes, you A levels, that's not what happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just fill us in. Is there any risk of, if you genetically modify a crop to be, let's take the example of herbicide resistant,
Yes.
of that herbicide resistance, and I'm going to be purely qualitative here,
Yes.
using non-technical terms,
Yes.
escaping
Right. No.
into the environment?
No, unless you modified weeds to be herbicide resistant, there's no way.
Which would be awful.
They're different species, so they can't mate. They're incompatible to mate. You can't. No.
No.
So, yeah, no.
I think
It's like that thing about there was this one scientist that found autism with a link to MMR vaccine, and then the media just ran with it, and now people still to this day, which infuriates me, going, no, I'm not going to get my children vaccinated because it might give them no, it won't give them autism.
Yeah.
There was one scientist being stupid who got penalised for saying that, and the papers even apologised after that, but they still went, no, it was written once in the paper, so it must be factual and true. It's just not. It's not.
Yes. It's absolutely sensationalist, isn't it? It once again panders to the age-old idea of the mad-haired scientist in a dark lab splicing genes at random, laughing,
Yes.
madly to himself, and it absolutely has no correspondence to reality. I think maybe you can justify certain things, like I think that the concern from which this is grown out of is the idea that perhaps you have a small experimental strain of something you've engineered, and then that will crossbreed with the same species in the wild and
Potentially.
spread that. Maybe that is potentially. But it grossly blown out of proportion by the media and so forth to all crops will bleed genes between one, as though genes just fall out of cells and crawl across the ground into neighbouring cells.
Scientists actually have bred a man and a plant together to make a Superman plant.
Yes,
Is it not? None of this is
Yes.
true. It's not possible.
So, but what this does, I mean, potentially we've shown that the concern itself isn't realistic. It does show that it's a real concern.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely, because there's sufficient bias of a big chunk of the world's population against it that could essentially provide an enormous impetus against this thing.
For the majority, though, I would like to be clear, though. I don't feel as though we would be saying that's any fault of anyone's own. For the majority,
no,
of people,
absolutely not.
I was just going to say something controversial about that point.
No, please do.
Is a person is smart, clever, intelligent, they can think. People in the general are stupid.
Yeah.
That's an
People as
excellent
a group
point.
Yeah.
are
Yes.
dumb and listen to the media without any pinch of salt. They just read it and they go, oh my god, everything's bad and
But the
we're all gonna die.
individual is
The individual is
intelligent.
clever and smart and can think for themselves.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point.
So we would like to encourage everyone,
Yes.
before you form an opinion about genetically modified organisms, go away and read.
Yep.
And
Research.
don't only read what's on Google. If you can, find a couple of scientific papers
Yes.
Absolutely.
and see
So
what they
that's
say.
what I do now. Well, before I went to university, I used to read the papers. I go, oh, "This is a load of all tosh," and then just leave it on the side. But now I read the papers. I go, "And that's interesting." However, does it have any evidence to back it up? So I would look at primary papers written by the people, and then when I find the papers, I would look at the error bars, and if they're like wildly inappropriate, I'd go, right, that's just useless and rubbish. Normally, there was a really good article in the BMJ, which is the British Medical Journal, and it was how to analyze a news article for its scientific merit. So you have to look for the source, look where they found this information, go back to the source, find the original paper, read the paper, and then that will tell you everything you need to know, because the paper won't get published unless it's got scientific backup.
Been peer reviewed and so forth.
Yeah, peer reviewed, etc. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing because have you you must have done this yourself. You're just talking about going back to sources. How often the sources have no corroboration with the story that they're referenced at all.
Most of the sources say stuff like, we have reason to believe that maybe there's it's very
We'd like to raise the possibility of, and then it's reported as absolute scientists have discovered.
You go something like, it has been shown that there is statistical significance, that there is a difference between A and B, and then in the papers we're like, there is definitely a difference between A and B. Look how different A and B are. So no, there's a slight statistical difference between A and B. We don't know what this means, and it's normally discussed. So each scientific paper has an abstract which explains everything.
Yes.
and then an introduction revealing the scientific basis, and then the results of the experiment, and then the discussion. And the discussion normally and the results sort of explain what's going on, but the discussion is very good. Normally they say stuff like, "This is why we have done this experiment to prove that this happens. But however, from our experiment, we have shown that this possibly could happen rather than this must happen all of the time."
Yeah.
This
you can't do that in science.
Resource that you've mentioned, helping people understand papers and referencing.
Yes.
If you could dig it out and send it to me, I'll put it on the Facebook page.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That would be excellent. Right, so I want to tie this back into what we're actually trying to talk about.
Population control.
So the point that Sam was making, to try and bring it back, was that should genetically modified crops become more widespread, subject to this condition, which we've just said, well, really that condition is already met, so they will probably almost definitely very rapidly become increasingly widespread.
Yes.
Should that happen, then we will be able to produce even more food.
Yeah.
And potentially that food will be healthier, right? Because you'll be able to engineer them to be better for you in some way, quite potentially.
Potentially, yes. Something I want to bring up here is the notion of changing demographics, because we treat population control as though something that which would continue for all perpetuity, with something that once it's started, it will just go on and on and on. But something that we observe from certain countries in terms of almost a scale of progress, that what happens is that countries who suddenly get medical advances, especially third world countries which are gifted them through aid, their population explodes because, as we've said already, people used to have life expectancies in the 40s or something like that, and the mortality rate for their children was incredibly high. So you'd have to have 4 or 5 children, in the hope that one would survive. And then suddenly, if you remove this catastrophe, and all of them have a good chance of surviving, you have 4 or 5 children, all of them survive, and you yourself age into your 80s. That is the reason that you get this explosion of population. And it's after a few generations that people start to accustom to this, which is where we're about now. But if you look at advanced, ahead of the curve, you see countries like Japan and Norway and Canada, which actually show a tail off in their population rate. It actually is starting to decrease. Yeah. Simply because people have, the society has almost reconfigured itself to conditions such that...
Even the United Kingdom is further along than you're giving the impression. If it wasn't for people moving to this country, our population would be decreasing.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Well, but again,
that demonstrates
it does actually demonstrate the point. Yes, but it is worth arguing, or at least raising the possibility that perhaps this curve of population explosion is almost a necessary step in the evolution of a society. That it's a step along the path to a stable, enlightened, advanced society which is capable of managing its own population.
But we don't know what happens next.
Well, we don't, which is very interesting.
Sam and Akshay, if there is this problem, or we've said that it's likely the population is going to continue to expand incredibly rapidly, haven't we? Have we concluded that with relative certainty? For the time being...
Well, it certainly has done in recent years, and there's all the probability it's going to continue in the next couple of decades.
But something is going to have to change.
It is.
And so my question to you is, what? If we can't keep this up, what's likely to happen? What sorts of solutions to this problem are there that you're aware of?
If we go to China, which is the most densely populated country, well, they had a I don't know if they still do, but they had a one-child policy.
Yes.
But then and you can see how that's worked. It absolutely has. If you look at all the graphs and all the information, it definitely has worked. And you can see the cutoff. But then, as a parent, if you want to go, actually, I want to have 2 kids, you can't do that. So you're ethically impeding on people's rights to have children.
Yes, I think there's no arguments against. There are certain methods which will work. It's it's whether as a species, so that's how we want to play things.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that thing to Mars, right?
Yes,
right at the start. So we could just send people there. No, I'm just...
Yes, like the old penal colonies sending people to Australia. We'll just outsource everybody to the Red Planet.
To Mars.
Yes, to Mars. Well, it's certainly actually, it's absolutely a possibility. We joke about it, but this is something which, futurists are very big on, the idea that colonizing space is the next step.
And really that's saying, well, there is no solution to this problem. We just need to get somewhere else.
Yes, we just need to get a back, extension, essentially, on the Earth. But, it is interesting in the kind of... is that not the purpose of our species? To expand, to grow to new areas, to populate where there is no population.
If you chose to use a language system of purpose, which is often useful in biology, then yes, arguably that is the purpose of our species.
I raise this only, I don't say that as a very abstract idea. I mean, in terms of should we even attempt to curtail this? Is this why and also it goes some way to explaining why this is something which is hard to curtail in the first place. There's momentum against it because the fundamental drive is to foster children and just suddenly say in a very high-minded abstract sense, no, I will not procreate for the sole purpose of 2 generations hence. It's quite difficult. It's hard to process. Yes, it's hard to accept. Even if you can logically accept it and you absolutely understand the situation, it's simply hard to govern your entire life based on something which won't affect you personally.
Because we are, by and large, inherent creatures.
Yes.
Inherently selfish creatures.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same argument as with climate change. Lots of, almost everyone now agrees that oh yes, I should recycle. I should get a more fuel economy, more economic car, whatever. But I don't care because I'll be dead before the effects come into place. And I can understand that, even if I disagree with it. I'd prefer people would take a bit more responsibility. But I can absolutely understand that kind of motivation. And it's the same argument here.
So if population is going to continue to... So what you've kind of spelt out there is that if we're... Or another way of looking at that, perhaps, is to say, yes, let's expand, let's do that, let's go for that.
Yeah.
That's the drive of our species, let's try and expand, let's keep this up, right? In the meantime, because we can't do that yet...
No.
In the meantime, what do you do? Because we're stuck here for now.
Well, I'd like to go back to the point made earlier that there is this development, the correlation between development and population growth. And there is you get this huge population expansion when you're industrializing, and then when you get to Japan's level of development, its population goes down. And I think the real solution is development. If we much of the world has already industrialized, so if they carry on developing, the population increase will continue to go down, and then it will have a more sustainable birth rate.
So how are we going to go about that, though? Can you flesh that out a little further?
So you're talking about here essentially the first world countries raising the third, those who are less fortunate, essentially imbuing them with a level of technology which we have access to, essentially allowing them to skip certain processes.
Isn't that a tad condescending though? Because
it absolutely is.
If they want to run the country how they want to run the country, maybe they don't.
Oh no, I mean in terms of infrastructure, in terms of if you don't have to spend 200 years discovering all of these antibiotics, we could just give them to third world countries.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Essentially allowing you to skip the several generations worth of population explosion.
Absolutely, that could potentially work as long as the developing countries. I'm not sure how willing they would be to accept that.
But this suggestion that you're making, it's essentially saying, as nations become increasingly advanced, in general, their populations, purely the population of that nation, ignoring any movement of people, are going to start to decrease rather than increase. Or at the very least, that growth in population is going to begin to curtail itself.
Yes.
So we need to focus on those nations where that is not the case and try and bring them to that place.
So we need to focus on economic growth.
Is the argument that you're putting forward, but for a moment there we just saw something of, well, you could go about doing that, but how is that condescending? There is this element of, well, it's their right to do.
Well, I say this because this has been something which has been going on in South America a lot, and country, especially Brazil. Essentially, they've come to the first world countries and they've invited lots of investment from the Western world and so forth, and they've benefited hugely. The population has increased, but is now already showing the same trends that we see. But the kind of things that I'm uncertain as the countries like India and China don't fit into this model at all. They are advanced countries, and yet their population is by far the worst out, spiraled out of control, and it seems that they don't fit the model, and I'm not sure why.
Their per capita output is not leading the world.
Right.
They're
So is it simply because they're so large, or?
that's partly to do with it.
Right.
They have industrialised over the last half century, and that's led to the population increase, which
if
fits
you
the
just
model
look at the
perfectly.
available landmass, a lot of the landmass is fertile landmass, and it's an awful lot bigger than the UK. So if they are just coming out of that industrial revolution type period that we had, and just physically the landmass is so much bigger and it's fertile, unlike the example of Australia, you would expect the population to be huge. Actually, that does follow the trend, doesn't it?
Well, maybe this is just pure ignorance on my part. It just seems that to the extent to which they are orders of magnitude larger in population than anywhere else, even countries which are equal in landmass and also fertile.
But you take India. India is an incredibly fertile country.
It is. Perhaps this may just be lack of research on my part, but they stick out like sore thumbs in terms of they are two places which don't seem that special, which have enormous populations relative to anywhere else. They are, I think it's 1.2 billion in India, 1.4 in China, and then the next biggest is a few hundred million somewhere else. So, probably the US or the Philippines. And I'm not sure about the figures with America is...
Yep, I'm looking at them now.
Oh, you're looking at them?
It's 1.3 billion in China, 1.2 billion in India.
Right.
And then... I'm going to have to kind of do a bit of a guess to look over it. It looks like it's then the States with 320 million.
Yes. So, in terms of how much arable land the US has relative to that, it's not that much smaller, surely, relative to the, almost 4 times population discrepancy. As in the US's arable land mass.
Yeah.
Surely, it doesn't strike me, just looking at atlases, again, complete lack of research, but it seems that their arable land mass would not be 1/4 that of the arable land of either India or China. But they have 4 times the population.
We do know not to trust maps, though.
Oh, we do, yes, we do. Maps lie.
Often to scale.
Maps lie.
Maps are always not to scale. You can't get the maps. How the maps work is there was a brilliant thing I read about. It was you've got different types of maps, and some of them stretch out some of them stretch out the land masses so they look longer than they are. So you've got stuff like places where Greenland is almost just under half the size of Africa, but it looks about the same size as Great Britain, where we're actually tiny.
Yes.
And you've got the only way to actually show a proper map effectively to scale would be using globe.
Yeah.
Even they're not very good.
Right.
Yeah. So this thing of overpopulation, we need to be focusing on those nations where population growth is at its highest. Yes. And those nations are inevitably those nations which are not as economically well developed. Therefore, the focus here is on economic development.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe something else worth mentioning. Figures that I just maybe one of our guests would know, or maybe Matt knows, about things like when we say life expectancy or mortality rate. Life expectancy in the UK is 83, I think 85 or something in that area.
Yes.
But is that based on people who are born now, or is that average over the population, or is that people who are dying now? Or
it's average over a generation, I think.
Over a generation?
Yes.
But which generation?
About 30 years.
Is that the people who are being born now, or is that the people who are dying now, or the people, or everyone, or the middle, or the average middle-aged person? Or because it seems that we were just talking about, 2012, the first person was born who was expected to live for 1,000 years.
Which is still
amazing. And I said 1996 was the first generation of people who were expected to live to 100. And it just seems that it would be worth knowing maybe what that figure actually means, because I've never looked into it, and it just suddenly struck me as, well, we say it's 85. Is it? It could be much longer, because a credible number of our current population are elderly. Our demographic is shifted towards the elderly, and lots of them have lived very different lifestyles, and under poor nutrition, under lots of smoking and drinking. Medical technology was far decreased in their youth. You had things like polio. Yes. And all of this, which affect lifespan. I'm just wondering, perhaps this is weighting it down. And that maybe the true life expectancy of people our age might be much larger, which in that case would affect our expectation of our population evolution.
Which would certainly
because we'll all stick around.
Lead to some skewing.
Yes,
of course.
that would mean that things are slightly worse actually than we've given the impression. That in the well-developed countries there is still slightly more of a problem than we might have
because we just won't die.
Yeah,
we're just going to stick around for long. I mean, if 2012, the problem will never go away because they won't die ever. for all intents and purposes, 1,000-year lifespan is forever.
On the scale of this.
To be fair, if you've seen, this is obviously fictitious. So Torchwood, which is a BBC TV program.
Yes, the special.
They had the special called Children of. Not Children of Death. That's the series before. The series after, which I can't remember. Something Everyday Paradise or something, and nobody could die. Something happened where nobody could die. People would just keep living.
Yes.
People that should have died a long time ago.
I remember that. That was very interesting. So and they handled a lot of good issues.
They did handle quite a lot of good issues, and it was. They sort of said, right, it might be terrible, it might be horrible, but it wasn't this simple, but I'm simplifying it for ease. They said, right, we've got a big red button. If we push the button, everybody that should die will die, and the people that were going to die anyway before this thing came in, which made them stay alive. When we pushed this button, and they had this whole controversy of should we push the button, and they did, because you couldn't sustain it, and you're not choosing who dies. It's automatic. They were going to die anyway. You just chose when they died, over them never dying, because we can't sustain people living forever.
No.
So having said what I said about the 2012, the baby being born to 1,000, there may be a sort of protocol that's put in place going, we will restrict everybody to live through 300 years or something. There might be that in many years.
Which is,
an equally large problem.
It feels like that must be a long way away.
That is very, very long way away.
But maybe not. If you think people are alive now could have a potential lifespan at least 100 years. At
the minimum.
Yeah, at the minimum, 100 years. I mean, that is a long time for everyone to live.
Unless they're hit on the bus, hit by a bus.
Yes, absolutely. You will have problems of trauma and disease, but in terms of your average life, how long can you expect to live?
If you lived in a bubble away from everything, and then you got fed properly and everything like that happened, then it
seems that's where our technology is going. That eventually human beings will be effectively biologically immortal.
Yes. I was just going to say, from your point earlier, and you said how do you calculate life expectancy? They get the whole population, and they find out percentages of people that died between 0 and 5, 5 to 10, all the way up,
right,
and then they use that to work out what the average life expectancy is.
Right.
Called a life table.
So we will have some waiting then, because our demographic is shifted towards the elderly.
Aging,
there will be some skewing towards the people who are older. So we're saying that the life expectancy for those younger is actually much larger than the official figure.
Yeah. You can't. Because our demographic is skewed that way. If we had a perfect demographic where there were exactly the same percentage of people at all the different ages, then there would be no skewing.
Right. So we could say a rough estimate. I mean, we said the 1996 was over 100. So of our generation, only a few years before that, we could make a rough estimate somewhere in the mid-90s. Where we could expect to live. I mean, of course, we don't know how the maths works, but it being relatively shifted from 85 between that and 100, you could say.
Yeah, I mean, we're likely to live above 90. I would have thought.
Yeah. The average life expectancy is 81.5 years for the UK.
I've looked at the distributions as well of life expectancy. You can see that the median is always above the mean as well.
Yes.
So people live on the median life expectancy is 90.
But I've just come across something right now. It's just really odd, because the fertility rate has decreased.
Really?
Births per woman. Yeah, the fertility rate has decreased.
But then that's not surprising.
So less women are having children.
Yeah.
That's
the number. That's why the population might still be shrinking.
Right.
It's a balance between fertility rates
and population growth. Yes.
Because I've got a graph up now of fertility rates, and it basically says, according to Sam's argument, which I think is a very solid argument, the places we need to be focusing on are Central Africa and Central Asia.
Right.
As well.
Yeah, so Central Africa is. I think Sam had a really good point about that, because it's developing, and you got many children who have to sort of take over the land and take over and do the work effectively.
Nigeria particularly is the country to watch, because I think the UN projections put it at something like it's going to approach 1 billion by the end of the century.
Wow.
1 billion.
Wow.
And also,
gosh,
tiny.
Yes.
For 1 billion people, that's very small.
That is incredibly small.
Right. So overpopulation, it is a problem, and it has more of an economic solution rather than anything else.
Yes.
Basically,
absolutely.
it's what we've concluded.
So
Does everyone agree with that?
Yes, to an extent. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do. Yes.
Good.
Fantastic.
Good,
We've
thank
got
you
to
very
some
much.
kind of conclusion.
I know, it's incredible.
I know, yes.
And everyone
Unprecedented.
agrees. It's bizarre. Thank you very much, Sam and Akshay,
Wonderful to have you
coming on.
back.
Thank you. For having
thank you
us.
for being on this two-part show.
Yes, absolutely. We look forward to having you back potentially in the future.
At some point, maybe next year.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And please do tune in 2 weeks' time for our next show.
We will be back for our last show of the term, I think.
It will be. Yes, it will be.
Fantastic.
Oh,
I'm sure. Oh,
Thank you.
yes. Oh, thanks, Akshay. Right. Well, I'm sure we'll have a lovely topic lined up for everybody.
We will.
So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks' time. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend.
It's me again. Thank you for listening to Because the Universe. Remember that our next show will be on in 2 weeks' time from whenever you were last listening. And do email us at becausetheuniverse@aol.com if you would be interested in coming on to a show. We would love to have you with us.